how to prepare a business case study, and how not to. Here's a story of two college roommates, Fred and Ted. They sat side by side in the same business class, and it was one that used a lot of business cases to teach the material. The time came for the students to prepare for their first case discussion. The prof told them, in his most austere professor's voice, "You need to make case preparation a priority. The case is 10 pages long, and you should take about 2 hours to read it, analyze it, and come up with some solutions. Remember, I'll be calling on you, even if you don't have your hand in the air. So be ready." Fred took the professor's words to heart and pulled out the case later that night. But Ted knew the professor was bluffing. Nobody cold calls students these days, he told Fred. And even if he does, there are like 25 of us in the class, so there's about a 1% chance he's going to call on me. Fred told Ted he might want to retake his statistics class, and he went back to prepping the case. Fred started by reading the case question, the question they'd be discussing in the class, because he thought that would at least help him identify what was relevant in the case. He then carefully read the case, trying to put himself in the role of the protagonist. If I stand in her shoes, he thought, then my solutions will probably be a little more realistic. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Ted diligently played his video games. He knew he had plenty of time tomorrow before the business class to do homework. Fred's next step was to spend some time looking over the exhibits in the back of the case. Budget data, some info on the competition in the industry, a few cost projections. He used that information to calculate what it would take for the protagonist in the case to break even with her new product. The prospects didn't seem promising. "Dude, I got the high score," shouted Ted. "Come on, Fred, get a life and grab a controller." Fred pressed on, though. He wondered if maybe he missed something in the case. He went back through and considered another option, a more innovative one that might work better. Still, his revenue projections seemed way too optimistic. The protagonist needs to back off this new product, Fred concluded. He jotted down a few more notes and went to sleep, the sound of aliens biting the dust still in the background. The next morning, Fred met Cindy and Mindy at the cafeteria. They were in the business class too, so the three of them discussed the case. The girls had come up with an alternative that Fred hadn't considered, something that might actually work for this company. Fred added some of his financial analysis skills to their idea and tweaked their recommendation to make it more viable. Then the three of them went off to class. Along the way, they saw Ted, reading the case for the first time as he walked across campus. "I got this," Ted told them. "She should launch the product as soon as possible. It'll make millions." Fred smiled politely. Cindy rolled her eyes. Mindy thought, "You're going to get it all right." Sure enough, as Ted predicted, the professor first called on someone other than Ted to respond to the case. Then he cold called a second student. And then, Ted. "How do you see it, Theodore?" Ted stammered through a response, and then the professor pounced. "Is she going to make money if she does that? How much? Did you factor in the fixed cost of production? What about the fact that the competition's already established in that market?" Ted was stumped each time. In the end, all he could manage was, "That's a good question." "Thanks for the feedback," his teacher snickered. "Fred, can you give us some insight here?" Fred's answer was a home run in the upper deck. He laid out a couple different scenarios with some numbers to back them up, giving Cindy and Mindy credit where it was due. But suddenly another student interrupted. "That'll never work," and he went on to make his argument. He and Fred went back and forth for about 5 minutes debating the merits of their ideas. In the end, the professor asked the class to vote, and about half of them agreed with Fred. He was exhilarated by the exchange, but ultimately disappointed by the vote. Next time, thought Fred, I'm not only going to come up with a business strategy, I'm going to come up with a persuasion strategy to sell my ideas. As Fred and Ted walked out of class together, the professor gave Fred a thumbs up. A few hours later, Fred was back at it, prepping the next case, this time with Cindy and Mindy. So what's the moral of the story? There are actually lots of them. Here are 7 tips to prepare for a case discussion. First, start by reading the case question to help you sift the information. The case question is essentially a filter to separate what's relevant from what's not. Next, invest a lot of time reading the case carefully. Ideally, make it undistracted time. This is not like reading a novel. You need to focus and concentrate. The third tip is this. As you read, put yourself in the protagonist's shoes. The more you can do this, the more realistic your solutions are likely to be. Tip 4. Closely consider the exhibits at the end of the case, and if necessary, use those data to make better decisions. Don't ignore them. Crunch the numbers. Do the quantitative analysis to inform and support your recommendations. Also, don't be satisfied with your initial conclusions. Critique them, thinking through your assumptions and whether there may be an even better way. Tip 6 is this, and don't miss this one. Consider meeting with a few other students before class to discuss and sharpen your recommendations. For many students, this is where the real learning happens. Plus, it gives you a chance to talk through your ideas in a small group, enabling you to participate more confidently in class. And lastly, and as part of your case preparation, develop a persuasion strategy. Think through not only a great answer to the case question, but how you're going to convince others that you're right. You see, it's not enough to be the smartest person in the room or to have the best idea. You have to sell it too. And here's one bonus tip. Stay mindful of how much this is going to help you. Yeah, case study is a lot of work if you do it right, but it will vastly improve your ability to solve problems and to make wise decisions and to confidently, persuasively present your ideas. If you're serious about learning and about developing into an outstanding professional, invest the time to prepare cases well. You'll see a terrific return on that investment.